Mm. Hello, YouTube. My name is Alan, and it's that time once again. Let's talk metal. May be talking a little funny tonight. I am still getting over the flu, which caused me to miss the recent Heavy Metallurgy live stream with Darcy and Jurgen that covered the Metal Church discography. So I did want to take an opportunity to put forth my thoughts on the catalog since I had spent a lot of time listening to the records and learning parts of the catalog I didn't know very well. The guys did a great job on the live stream. You should definitely go check that out for a much more in-depth discussion on all things Metal Church. I'm going to go through this relatively fast. Again, my voice is still a bit off. And the bottom line is, Jurgen and Darcy know this band much better than I do. I think they hold the band in much higher esteem than I do also. I like Metal Church quite a bit. But there was a big part of their catalog I wasn't familiar with. Like a lot of folks, I kind of, lost track of them in the 90s and didn't pick back up on them for a long time. And, kind of to summarize things here at the get-go, I feel like, Metal Church, while it's a very good band, I think they are kind of one of those second-tier bands at the end of the day. And that may appall Jurgen and Darcy. They both like this band a lot. But Metal Church strikes me as, the sports analogy would be that, they're a really good veteran player. When you're called a veteran player, it means you're always good enough to stay in the league. There's always some team that wants you active on the roster, but you're never going to do that many spectacular things. You'll have a good season here and a good season there, but for the most part, you're just turning in a solid effort, filling a role, very kind of blue collar type of approach. And I think, Darcy had even kind of used that same language to describe the band during the live stream, that, they have like a very workman-like effort to them, which I think that, fits Metal Church just fine. They have had some standout albums. We're going to talk about them. But I feel like a lot of their catalog is, pretty straightforward. There's not a lot of surprises along the way. They've had lineup shifts and all that, but for the most part, Metal Church is, very straightforward. And you do get to a point with this kind of band where you can feel like, I've heard some of these albums. I probably already know what the others sound like without investing a ton of time into them. So apologies to those who are really into the band and rank them as, a personal favorite. I just don't have them ranked that high. I think they're a very good band, long-term band, veteran band, but I think there's a big chunk of their catalog that kind of hovers in that average to good kind of territory. And again, this isn't slamming the band. There's very, very few albums out of the 13 studio albums that I think are below average. So for the most part, again, they've been very steady and consistent. I just don't think, they, ever have those breakthrough moments as much as a lot of, other long-running contemporary bands. Since I don't own most of these albums on physical copies, we're just going to stick to the Metal Archives page here and work our way through the list. So let's go ahead and start scrolling down here. All right. Of course, first up, probably open these in separate tabs. It's easier than going back and forth, usually. Yeah, so of course we have 1984, the debut album. This is, the album for most people. I think if you asked 100 metalheads to name their favorite Metal Church album, I'd be very surprised if you didn't have over half of them pick this one and it not even really be close. It's a great debut album, kind of a classic of the genre. The genre here is traditional heavy metal. It's not thrash metal. They were always sort of lumped into thrash, and they leaned slightly towards thrash, but never enough to be considered a thrash band. I never liked that tag for Metal Church. This is just good, solid, traditional heavy metal. Some reviewers here and there have likened them to an American version of Accept, and I think there's some merit to that. They have that same heaviness. You have, the same vocalist, with, very charismatic, kind of rough character, and it's unabashedly metal, and that's great. So yeah, the debut has a well-known track list. You guys don't need me to go through these song by song, but it's a very forceful, aggressive album. Great riffing throughout. Some nice variety shown on tracks like Metal Church to the speedier battalions and stuff like that. The Highway Star cover you can do with or without. It's not a bad cover. It's not necessary. I think Jurgen mentioned during the live stream that some editions have a bonus track called Big Guns, which yeah, is also okay. So yeah, it's a very good debut. It has definitely earned its reputation as a top US metal album from the time. For me personally, I have it ranked number two, which I think is where several of the guys had it ranked as well. Jurgen famously had this one ranked quite a bit lower, but he holds other parts of the catalog in a higher regard, and that's quite okay. But yeah, this is my number two. Very good album. Um, it's just one that I don't play it as much. And when I do play it, it's usually like, one spin and I'm good. It's not one that I need to play over and over on repeat. Not anymore, anyway. All right. We move to the sophomore effort, The Dark, 1986. Um, this one, I'll say right away, this is my number one. This has always been my favorite Metal Church album. The opening one-two punch of Ton of Bricks and Start the Fire, that alone is worth the price of admission. And the entire album is pretty good. If the album has a weakness, I've commented on this before, but lyrically, it's not the best set of lyrics ever written. They're covering different topics and stuff. It's not like it's all party, party, girl, girl, or anything like that. It's just that, you can tell they hadn't really quite found their muse when it comes to writing really strong lyrics just yet. But yeah, it's a forceful album, very aggressive, kind of, takes what they've been doing before and just feels like it's a little more focused, a little more intense. Fantastic album. Like this one a lot, and yeah, that's why it's my number one. All right, so then we get to the third album. 3 years go by. And of course, famously, the band has to change vocalists here. David Wayne is out, and Mike Howe, who had been with Heretic on the very underrated Breaking Point album, well, Mike Howe is in, and we have Blessing in Disguise. And here we have a very uninspired album cover. I've never liked this cover with the weird kind of silverish wash of just the band photo. Let's face it, the cover for The Dark wasn't great either. Metal Church has not had a ton of great album covers. Um, with this album, this was my introduction to Metal Church. Now, this was the first one I ever got. Some kid at school had a Metal Church t-shirt on. I liked the logo. I had not heard anything by the band, but on a future trip to one of the local record stores, they had a cassette copy of this for relatively cheap, and I picked it up. Don't remember what kid in school had the t-shirt on, but yep, they cost me like $8.68 the next time I was at the record store. Right away, I think Mike Howe fits absolutely fine with the band. I know there are some folks that are strict David Wayne adherents and they don't like Mike Howe's era. I'm not like that. I think they both did an excellent job with their 10 years in Metal Church. So yeah, Howe sounds great here. No problems with that whatsoever. This album opens on a monster. Fake Healer is a devastatingly heavy track. Killer riff. Mike is just screaming his guts out, so pissed off and angry sounding. Very cynical track about, the medical industry and, the ridiculous costs. And that's 1989. We hear tons about all this stuff going on these days. It's nothing new, folks. And this has been a long-running problem. And yeah, this track is just an absolute crusher. My issue with this album is that, personally, I don't think it has a lot of follow-up to that track. Darcy pointed out the Spell Can't Be Broken is a good deep cut, and I agree. I do like that one. Um, but here's the problem we're looking at right now. 9 tracks, but this album pushes 55 minutes across 9 tracks. Um, and look at these run times. We've got 5:55, 6:38, then a 4:44, then a 9:31, 7:21, 6:46. A lot of really long tracks, and I feel like some of these tracks overstay their welcome, that their material's not quite good enough to drag on this long. A good example of that is Rest in Peace, 6.5 minutes. It's not a bad song, but it doesn't need to last that long. Uh, Anthem to the Estranged, not a bad song. 9.5 minutes, it feels like it takes forever to get to the end of that song. Badlands, the same way. I know folks like this one because they had the video and all that, but I don't think it's a strong enough song to carry on for 7.5 minutes almost. So yeah, there's too many songs that take too long to reach their end. This album needs to be about 10 minutes shorter. And at the end of the day, I only rank it number six. Some people have this one much higher in the catalog. Again, it's not a bad album. I'd still say it's an above average record, but yeah, I think they needed to tighten up the songwriting here some. It feels a little bit like they were going through one of those growing pains where it's like, okay, we need to leave some of those short, angry metal subjects behind. And invest in some longer songs, diversify our portfolio, write from a more mature, vantage point and all that. And I think they just maybe overdid it a bit. Last thing I'll say here is I don't think the production helps this album much. Much like the cover art, the production sometimes just feels very faceless. And when you add that to long songs that aren't holding my attention well to begin with, it kind of becomes a bit monotonous. So yeah, Blessing in Disguise only ranks number six for me. Then we move on to 1991's The Human Factor, album number four. This one was a big deal for me in high school. Came out while I was in high school. The music video promo for it was Date with Poverty. Uh, and it's a great track. It was a good choice for the lead video. It's got, that big honking riff, instantly catchy. They pound away at it. It's really good. The video's kind of cheesy. There's not a whole lot there. The guy's kind of thrashing out in just a rundown area and some guy driving around in a Cadillac that I guess he's supposed to be like, the seedy landlord or something, whatever. But yeah, it was a great track, a good way to launch the album. And the album overall is quite good. I think this one is a little underappreciated in their catalog. Production's much more lively. Songs are a lot punchier than on Blessing in Disguise. You've got the length reined in here a little bit more, at least. It's, closer to 50 minutes than 55. And again, there's a few songs up in that 6 minute range, but fewer of them. They got the song lengths pared back down a little bit. That's good. There's a little cosmetic thing about this album I've always hated. Right here, you've got tracks four, five, and six. In Mourning, In Harm's Way, and In Due Time. Why in the world did you put three songs in a row, back to back to back, that all begin with the word I in? That's just really weird. Feels like, were you stuck on ideas for song titles or something? Again, it's a very little thing. The songs are fine, but I hate the naming convention and the fact that they're all back to back to back in the track list. But no, this is a very strong album. It's still a fun listen, even to this day. Not one I play very often anymore, but when I do, I still really enjoy it. So this one ranks third for me, and it's a very strong third. I don't think there's really anything else that even challenges it. So strong album, underappreciated, Human Factor. Excuse me. All right, so the band's been doing pretty good up to this point. Four albums out. One thing, let's take just one more quick look there. Close that tab a little too quick. Human Factor, let's note the date here. Came out late March 1991. The date there is important because this album had a good 6 month life before the Black Album and Nevermind and 10 got dropped. Now, 91 is the year when stuff really starts to change for heavy music, but it changes in the fall of 91. The Human Factor came out early enough in 1991 that when it was released, when they were debuting the video for Date with Poverty, metal was still pretty much full speed ahead. All systems go. And so this album, did fine and got plenty of attention. If this album had come out 6 months later, it would have probably gotten severely buried by what was happening to the music scene come September of that year, when you started to see Nevermind drop and Metallica took over with the Black Album and Pearl Jam became a thing. And all of a sudden, most metal bands, they weren't given the time of day anymore. So yeah, the band kind of got a little lucky here that this was a release scheduled for early in 1991, so that they got kind of one more solid release out during heavy metal's heyday of popularity in the United States at least. All right, and so then on to number five. Let's see, 93. Only 2 years later, what could go wrong? Yeah, about that. We have 1993's Hanging in the Balance. The first thing that's gone wrong is you're now on something called Rising Sun Records. I'm not even sure this had a US distribution right off the bat. Maybe it did. If so, it was a bit buried. I know I did eventually see it in stores somewhere. I don't know if it was as an import, or maybe it got some US distribution and it was just kind of meager. Maybe it got a slightly later distribution on a different label. I don't know. But the bottom line is this album was not highly visible upon its release in 1993. And let's face it, if you'd seen it, you'd remember it because there's that cover. And this has to be one of the worst album covers in heavy metal history. People make those videos all the time, 10 worst album covers. You never see Hanging in the Balance come up, and it really should, because let's face it, that absolutely blows. Fun fact about it, too. The guys talked about the cover on the live stream, but I had done a little digging, and there's some fun tidbits here. Go over into the lineup stuff and over to like the like other staff tab. These folks that are involved in the art here, we have art direction. Notice the lack of other art credits. Let's check again. Uh, what about again another? They had two people working on art direction. This one also has no additional art credits listed on Metal Archives. Let's try, let's see, can we go for the hat trick here? Let's see, producer, artwork and design. And survey says, oops, survey says my internet connection is running slow all of a sudden. Once again, no additional art credits. None of the people associated with this artwork have a single second credit among them on Metal Archives. Yeah, I don't know if these people just worked for the company and kind of had it foisted on them to do something or what. But yeah, it's very telling. These people had no prior experience dealing with album art, and they had no experience after the fact either. So yeah, that's a thing. Second fun fact about this cover, later on in interviews, Mike Howe said flat out, this cover art was the final straw. It was the straw that broke the camel's back and made him quit the band, which is pretty incredible when you think about it. But I guess, things already, were maybe not going great. Metal Church is one of those 80s bands that had trouble transitioning into the 90s. They were having trouble finding their footing. And the fact that they worked on this album and then got saddled with this piece of crap artwork for him, it was just like, screw this. What the hell has the industry done to us? I'm out. So, yeah, cover art so bad it made the singer quit. How's the music? It's interesting. Some people have definitely warmed up to this album over time. Darcy ranks this one, I think, number five on his list overall. I'm not real familiar with this album. This is one I had to, check out when we agreed to do Metal Church a couple of months ago. Um, both Jurgen and Darcy, I think, mentioned yet, it has some good stuff on it. And, there were some moments on here that were good. The thing that struck me about the album is that it seemed like a very confused album. It did to me feel like a band that wasn't sure what direction they were supposed to go in. For example, there's lots of little acoustic parts here and there. There's an instrumental that's mostly acoustic, and it just feels like the band's not going like full on grunge or anything, but it feels like, are we supposed to maybe go like a little more hard rock now? Are we supposed to stick to the metal thing now? Are we supposed to diversify the portfolio again? So to me, the album just didn't seem to have much of a direction at all. It felt very rudderless. I rank it 13. I think it's one of the few albums in their catalog I would say is below average. And again, this is one of those albums that the people who like it seem to be like, well, you've got to listen to it a bunch. You got to let it really grow on you. And I understand that mentality. And if I listen to this 10 more times, maybe it does improve some. But my counter to folks when that argument comes up is if I've already played it a few times and I really don't like it, what's my incentive to keep investing, hour after hour after hour, replaying this just to see if it'll crawl its way up to like average? I mean, the album is again, it's 56 minutes and 45 seconds. If I play this five more times, that's 5 more hours of my life where I'm not playing albums I like or albums that I'm trying to get familiar with. I don't hear enough on here to make me want to invest any more time on hanging in the balance. Maybe I am missing out. Maybe someday I'll hear it again and it will be one of those eureka moments and I'll be like, oh, what a fool. I completely missed this one before. But for the time being, I have no interest in following up on this album. I've got it ranked dead last at 13. It is the only album of theirs I have with a below average ranking. And again, it's not that its music is horrible. It just feels like, pick a direction, go somewhere, do something. And I don't get that sense from the album at all. Like so many of their colleagues, I think Metal Church was kind of dead in the water in 93. You had lots of new bands coming up doing innovative stuff, especially in the different extreme metal branches. And these traditional bands that were holdover from the 1980s, 93 was a tough time for them. Let's move on. So we're going to album number 6. All right. All right. So yeah, several years go by. The band gets back together with David Wayne, and they're on Nuclear Blast, and they have an album called Masterpiece, and all this sounds great. Original legendary vocalist back. Band comes back after a long hiatus. This album does not seem to get much love, and I can see why. I have it ranked 12th, just one step above Hanging in the Balance. Um, David Wayne sounds weird on here. Right away on, the opening track, Sleeps with Thunder, it really sounds like he's trying to channel his inner Ozzy Osbourne, like, 70s era Ozzy. And 70s throwback is actually kind of a theme on this album. You get the sense that the guys were really, yeah, had spent the last 6 years digging back into their old 70s blues and rock and hard rock, roots kind of stuff and wanted to kind of go in that direction. And it's not terrible, but it's not particularly interesting either. There's not a lot of tracks on here that really grab you and make you feel like, hell yeah, Metal Church is back. It's more like it's almost like they're doing kind of like a trip down memory lane kind of gig or something. So yeah, not many folks on the stream had a lot of nice things to say about this one. Again, in terms of like a grade, I'd say maybe it's like a C kind of record, average, maybe slightly below average, but I'll give it an average ranking. It's not a terrible album. It's kind of boring. It's certainly not what you're really looking for in a metal church experience, I don't think. At least I'm not. So yeah, also kind of telling that it was they didn't do a whole lot with Nuclear Blast. We've often joked on other live streams about the fact that Nuclear Blast tends to take these older bands and they give them this standard issue contract where it's like, hey, we'll help make you popular again, but all you have to do is remake the same album that you used to make over and over for us. We've seen them do that with Testament and lots of other, legacy bands. I kind of wondered on revisiting Masterpiece if Metal Church is why Nuclear Blast had to adopt that policy. Because, here they're like, hey, we got Metal Church on the roster. Great. Let's see what we can do with them. Oh, they recorded a 70s rock album. Oh, God, nobody likes this. Okay, new policy moving forward. If we hire one of these veteran bands, by God, they're going to play veteran music for us and not go back on this some kind of retro gig that nobody asked for. I don't know. That's me being goofy, but there you have it. So yeah, number 12 on Masterpiece. Again, and it was also a one-off reunion with David Wayne at that point. It obviously didn't play out very well. We wait a bunch of years and we get to album number seven. So 2004's The Weight of the World. This one, it's one of those albums. Now, here's the point where I had not paid any attention to what became, the Ronnie Monroe era of the band. No offense to him. I had just completely lost track. Would see these albums from time to time. But looking at something like this, I'm just like, okay, there's another Metal Church album. Good for them. Nothing about this screams by me though. Um, but Monroe sounds fine. There's again, he does yeoman service in the band. There's no problems with that whatsoever. But you get into a string of albums here that I feel are mm, to a degree interchangeable. None of them are particularly bad at all, but none of them from this era really, stand out and grab me. And again, this is an era I don't have a lot of familiarity with. Weight of the World, I ended up ranking 11th and giving it an average grade of a C. Not bad, but yeah, nothing that makes me want to really come back and revisit it a lot either. After Weight of the World, you had Light in the Dark, 2006. So at least here, we're starting to get albums a little more, getting on that 2 year rotation. Okay, that's a good thing. Um, Light in the Dark, step in the right direction. I think this one's above average. I ranked it eighth. Feels like, the band's kind of moving in the right direction after those 90s missteps, for me at least. Yeah, it feels like okay, we've got the lineup. We're gelling. We're getting the songwriting's becoming a bit better here. So okay, progress is being made there. Then we get to the next one, album number nine. This Present Wasteland. This one's from 2008. Once again, keeping on schedule here. That's good consistency. Um, this album I had never seen or heard of in my life before agreeing to do the Metal Church discography with Jurgen and Darcy. When I pulled this one up and looked at it for the first time, just like, nope, never seen it, never heard of it, didn't even know it existed. Which, I mean, kind of speaks to how far Metal Church had fallen by this point, just how far below everyone's radar they had been. Um, And again, this one, about the same as the last one, above average record, ranked at ninth, not quite as good as Light in the Dark, but we're really splitting hairs on these. So you know, decent enough record. Then you get to 2013. So again, now we got one of those longer breaks. More years go by, and they resurface on something called Rat Pack Records. Which, I've looked Rat Pack Records up. They don't necessarily have a real deep catalog. Kind of, a little sad to see, again, one of these veteran bands end up on a label like this. Now, they still had better distribution on, better labels overseas, but, in the US, how was anybody supposed to find this thing? And even if you had found it somewhere, would you buy an album with this cover art? Called Generation Nothing with just some big red stupid CGI, cross out of a thing. Yeah, that just sucks. I mean, the fat lady from Hanging the Balance called and said your cover art needs to be better. Come on, that's when you put a cover on an album like that, you can't complain when you fail to sell records because you're doing nothing to help your cause. You're driving people away at that point. All right. Musically, this one's not bad. I ranked it seventh, a little higher than the other ones. I had this ranked the highest of the Monroe era records. This one, I feel like, again, it's got a little more energy to it. There's a little more metallic bite to it than some of the previous ones at times have been, just kind of a coasting along. This one also felt like maybe it had just a little more, punk kick in the ass uh, underlying some of the tracks, which I liked. It was a little injection of something that, they needed. So again, this whole era, not bad, but, pretty kind of middle of the road at the same time. All right, then we wait a few years and we get to album number 11, which is titled XI, Roman numeral for 11. I don't like it when bands do that. It's like, come on. We can count. We know which album this is. You can come up with a real title. If you can't, go back and try harder. The big deal with this album, of course, is that it marked the return of Mike Howe to the mic stand. And as an extremely strong return. This one, coincidentally, I had heard for the first time just, I don't know, a few weeks before Jurgen and Darcy brought up the idea of doing the Metal Church discography. So I was like, oh, yeah, I just heard 11 for the first time, not, again, just a few weeks before. Thought it was really good and wanted to, see what else I've missed there. So the timing was really, really good. And I think this album is really great. Mike sounds fantastic. He steps right back into the role and does it well. And it feels like the songwriting too just gets a real boost from his presence. Nothing against Monroe's era whatsoever, but this is just a stronger, more kick-ass set of songs overall. So yeah, this one I ranked this fourth actually. Have this ranked quite high. How does fantastic, and the band just feels energized and like they're really focused on playing hard hitting heavy metal again for the first time in a very long time. All right, so what happens after that? We get album number 12 just a couple years later called Damned If You Do. This one had some really good reviews. I was looking forward to checking it out after liking 11 so much. And something about this one didn't really connect with me. This is the one album that I will go back and spend more time with, and I have a feeling its ranking will shift around a lot more. I only have it 10th right now, um, and I'm not really sure why. Hal still sounds really good here, but it's just something on the songs uh, just did not hit me the right way. There's some of them, Monkey Finger being the one that stood out the most, where it feels like they were leaning a bit more rock and roll, but not in a way that worked for me. Again, this was a new album to me. Um, this is one that I do think there's enough going for it that I would be willing to spend more time, go back, play it a few more times, and see if it starts to come together a bit more. Um, we'll see. But for now, it ended up ranked 10th. I think other folks have it higher than that, and I probably have this one way too low at the moment. I could see this one eventually maybe working up to somewhere like around 7th, where it's a little higher than the Monroe era albums, but still not as good as 11. All right. So that only leaves one album left. Of course, after that album, Mike Howe tragically died via suicide. Um, the band would eventually carry on, bringing in a new vocalist, Mark Lopes. Yes, Mark Lopes from Ross the Boss Band, and they would release Congregation of Annihilation in 2023. And how the hell is this band still on this Rat Pack Records label? Like, somebody should be, picking them up and distributing them. Come on, we can do better than that, I think. No offense to Rat Pack, but you look at their roster, there's just, such a tiny label. This band should be on something with a little better distro than that. Anyway, Congregation of Annihilation. This is a very strong album. Some folks have commented that they feel like, Lopes overdoes the vocals a bit here and there, which I see their point. I don't think it was to such an extent that it was distracting, at least not for me, visiting this album and learning it for the first time, because I did not hear this when it came out. But yeah, again, it just feels like, much like the 11 album, it's a really good, aggressive, solid chunk of metal church songs with strong performances across the board. So, once again, this also makes me feel like I really do need to revisit that Damned If You Do album. That it seems like too much of an anomaly that I would have that album ranked so much lower than these other two that I've got, 11 ranked at 4. I've got Congregation of Annihilation ranked at 5th. I have a feeling there's not really that big of a drop off for the album in between those two. But yeah, fifth for this one, really good album. Like a B kind of grade right off the bat. And this is the kind of album that, yeah, now you'll stumble into this one, used or at some point when, I've got a few extra bucks to burn. I'm not above picking like this one or 11 up sometime. Good stuff here. And, that's kind of ending on a positive note. What I see is Metal Church in recent years has kind of hit their stride again, which is really, excuse me, which is really awesome to see. This is a band that I think for most people, they only really think of the earliest part of the catalog. The first two albums are the best. Some people like those next couple of My Cow albums, and then there's all this stuff in the middle. It's easy to kind of forget, that the band was still a going thing even. But even if some of those albums, like myself, you don't find those albums to be the strongest part of their catalog, I'm really impressed that the band has persevered and is currently putting out some of their best material since the 1980s. It feels like they have found their muse once more, and they're doing just fine. In closing, I'll go back once more to that accept comparison. Metal Church feels like, they've kind of gotten into that, same space that a band like Accept occupies. Accept still puts out very solid, consistent albums these days. They've, worked through the vocalist change and gotten a really good one. And at the same time, a new Accept album probably isn't going to break the mold. It's not going to, be the best thing they've ever done. But they've become very consistent. And if you like them, you're going to enjoy their stuff. And I feel like Metal Church has gotten to that point as well. Even though they've had, switch vocalists back again and again, they've always had someone really good behind the mic. And, over these past several albums, even go back to Generation Nothing, which I thought was, a pretty decent album, it feels like, again, they're able to deliver solid albums, that are good each time. They're not groundbreaking in any way. None of them are going to replace, Human Factor or The Dark, in my top, two or three slots of the Metal Church discography. But they are making, solid, relevant stuff. Not album, they're done are the days of putting out albums where it's like, well, yep, okay, that's a good enough album, but I'm not likely to ever take it off the shelf. I think they've kind of, kicked it up a notch. Let's go with that. And that is it for Metal Church rankings on my part. So now let's talk metal in the comments down below. What do you think? Are there certain albums that you really like that you think are overshadowed or overlooked? Are there certain albums you think that are overranked? I don't think I've ever heard anyone complain much about the debut album. Um, some people are not quite as high on the dark as others, but well, what do you think of the My Cow albums? Or you somebody who really digs those or really doesn't? Do you like the new material as much as I do, or do you feel like it's pretty cookie cutter? I can see where some people just wouldn't be interested in New Metal Church because it's a little too run of the mill compared to what they've done before. It's like some people want to hear something very new and exciting and interesting and innovative with each album. Metal Church isn't going to do that. And I think that's okay. There's a place for these bands, that kind of stick to their guns, and that's not going to appeal to some fans. But yeah, let me know what you think in the comments down below. Hopefully by the time I record another video, I'll have the rest of this flu out of my system, and my voice will be back to normal. Until then, everybody take care, and as always, keep banging your head.